Supreme Magus, Chapter 1. No matter if you are a pessimist or an optimist, Derek Esposito's life wasn't a good one nor a bad one. It was just a mediocre, insignificant existence. His father was a bipolar abusive man capable of disappearing in his bedroom for days during the depressive phase. He would wake up only to eat, use the bathroom, and the occasional "let's make your life miserable" fit of rage. During his euphoric phase, he would work like a madman, but not having any talent either as a businessman nor as a social climber, he was unable to both being successful and establishing the right connections. In his natural state, whenever he decided to actually take his medications, he was just a couch potato that would stand up and go to work just to avoid the blame and spite from neighbors and peers. Whatever was his mental condition, he was always a perfect example of an abusive father. His sons were always a disgrace in his eyes. They never studied hard enough, never were disciplined enough, nor did show enough respect. And he was always there to remember them how wrong they were. He would yell at them for the slightest mistake, constantly reminding them that they were just parasites that leached off his hard work. And when words weren't enough, or when they did fail to meet his expectation with school grades or chores, there was no teacher like his leather belt. Hence, Derek and Carl had to quickly learn how to fend off for themselves, since their absent-minded mother practically forgot about them right after giving birth, dedicating her life in pursuit of peace and quiet, staying as far as possible from her spouse's tantrums. Derek was 2 years older and desperately tried to take care of his little brother, but to no avail. They grew up watching and reading stories about heroes protecting the weak and upholding justice, but no hero ever appeared to save them. Every week, they would be forced to go to church to worship a nondescript benevolent God and his Son, the Savior of all mankind. But no matter how much they prayed or how good they were, no miracle occurred. So they simply stopped believing in heroes, and instead of wasting time with prayers, they crammed. School was their only oasis, but that lasted only until the 6th grade. Once in middle school, it didn't even take a month before the bullying started. Their cheap clothes and gloomy disposition made them the easiest targets. They were so used to being tossed around and insulted that they didn't even bother trying to fight back. For a long time, Derek had considered it the worst moment of his useless life. After a month, he knew he could not take any more of that, so he tried to make things better. He reported his father's abuse to the social services with an anonymous email. But being overworked and understaffed, the social work assistant made a brief visit and never came back. Then he tried to end the bullying by reporting the aggressors to a teacher, which in turn washed her hands by reporting it to the principal. The principal did not want to meddle with what he deemed as childish pranks, so he called their parents to inform them of the problem, hoping they would let it slide. And at least his wish came true. Derek, instead, took an extra beating for not being man enough to face his own problems. "Are you really that stupid to never learn anything from me? Never delegate. If you want something done right, do it yourself," Derek had never felt so helpless and desperate. So that night, he bawled his eyes out until he fell asleep. That had been the last straw. The next day, he felt different, clear-headed like never before. It was not the time for despair anymore. He needed a plan. It would take him years to realize that something inside him had died. He no longer was able to trust, hope, or develop any sense of kinship. He was surrounded by enemies, and to survive, Derek needed to be able to fight back. So, Derek asked his father to let him join a dojo and learn martial arts. And to his surprise, he did not have to beg or even ask twice. His old man was glad that his wimpy and scrawny poor excuse of a child was finally interested in becoming a man. His only condition was that Derek was not allowed to quit for at least 1 year, otherwise he would have to pay for it. Not only Derek started practicing Aikido almost daily, he would also wake up 2 hours early every single day to build muscle, doing push-ups, squats, sit-ups, and running until he was out of breath. In a few months, he was finally able to do every day 100 push-ups, sit-ups, squats, and run for at least 10 kilometers before going to school. Aikido soon revealed to be a perfect choice for his situation. At low level was mainly focused on self-defense, but there were plenty of space for attacking and fighting dirty. By practicing martial arts, he finally discovered something he was good at. He was not particularly nimble nor a fast learner. His hand-to-eye coordination was also average at best. His talent lied in the ability to spot the best time to hit a sensible spot during a block or a defensive maneuver. Even when the sensei was teaching sword or tanto arts, Derek always able to grasp the killing moves at his first try, sometimes even before the sensei completed the practical demonstration. It was an exciting yet disappointing discovery, since his only talent had no practical use. Even if Aikido was a sport with tournaments instead of a discipline, hits to groin, eyes, and trachea were universally forbidden. For months, Derek kept training hard while keeping a low profile at school, planning his next move. At the end of the first semester, Derek stopped hiding from the bullies and started replying in kind to every single insult they threw at him, using the best quick-witted rose lines he had found online. Derek paid attention to never go to the bathroom or to remain alone for too long, always keeping an adult witness in line of sight. It did not even take a full day before his enemies were fuming and outraged. Only when the veins almost popped out their necks, he threw his bait. "I have enough of you shit assholes. Meet me in an hour behind a grocery shop between Lincoln and the 3rd. Or are you too scared? Since you seek that, I will happily grant your wish, you faggot. It will only be you and the 3 of us, all right?" Derek nodded without believing him in the least, and he was right. When they entered the back alley, they had brought along 2 more people. Derek was waiting for them, leaned against the wall at the end of the blind alley. "There you are. I was starting to think you would stand me up." They started laughing. "Sorry we were late. Hope you do not mind we taking some friends for the party." Derek shrugged while grinning from ear to ear. "No problem. No matter how much worthless trash is always trash. I choose This alley because it's fully equipped with enough dumpsters to accommodate all of your friends. The last line hit a nerve, so they charged at him blindly. Gang up on him, guys. Do not let him escape. Let's show him who's the trash. And so they fell into his trap. Derek had come here preparing the terrain and choosing the best spot for the fight. A blind alley to not make them escape. The end of the alley so they would not notice the tripwire due to the dim light. The first two fell down hard on the concrete, and those behind them were so worried about not trampling on their friends that never saw the steel pipe coming. They did come in numbers. Derek had come fully armed. Using the pipe as a sword, he quickly hit them respectively on the head, the side of the knee, in the groin. Only then he started hitting the two that were trying to get back on their feet. While they were moaning and sobbing on the ground, he used a small knife to cut the tripwire. Then he started beating them again and again with the metal pipe, giving a special attention to the nether regions. Deeply inside, he knew what he was doing was wrong, but he could not care less. If the world was built to be unfair, the only possible course of action was to make it unfair at his advantage. So he took out the taser that he borrowed from his father and tased them until unconscious. Then he stripped them completely and took multiple photos of each one of them and even filmed them, arranging them so they would seem to be spooning to each other. Then he splashed them with a bucket of cold water and sealed the deal. Sorry to ruin your Brokeback Mountain moment, girls, but I need your attention for a minute. When the bullies woke up, they were still in so much pain they could barely notice that they were naked and embracing each other. Retorting to Derek, while he had still a firm grip on the steel pipe, was out of the question. So they kept quiet and listened. I have made quite a scrapbook of you, even a short movie. Uploaded it on my computer and even into the cloud. And it will be terrible if someone I do not know, like me, for example, would upload it then on all the biggest image hosting sites. You know how they say, internet never forgets. The bullies started crying and begging. Imagine how terrible would it be whenever someone would Google your name, be it your grandma, your girlfriends, or even the colleges you were willing to apply, the first thing to appear would be those photos. Dude, no, please, I do not even know you. I was just making a favor to a friend. It was only a joke. Please forgive me. The tire of begging gave him goosebumps. Derek wanted to puke at their hypocrisy. I do not care for your pathetic excuses. From this day onward, you will leave me alone. And you better pray that nothing happens to me, because the cloud is set so that if I do not enter the password every day, it will upload them everywhere. Without waiting for their reply, he turned back and walked away. Oh, almost forgetting, I randomly threw your clothes in the dumpsters. Can't remember which is which. If you do not want to go home in your birthday suit, you better start digging. So long, suckers. Derek returned home euphoric, almost singing. He had never felt so proud of himself and had the completely undeserved confidence that he would never think about those bastards ever again. Supreme Magus, Chapter 2. The bullying ended, but his social life never stopped being miserable. How could he possibly make any friends with such a shameful private life? He had to constantly hide the bruises with long sleeves and had to run out of plausible excuses for his streak of black eyes months before. His classmates and professors simply pretended to not know, and he just pretended to believe, being that good of a liar. It was painful, but manageable. He still had his little brother to share that pain with. Carl was all he had, his family, friend, and confidant. He was Derek's whole world. But then, when that age came, he started having crushes towards girls in his school, and those feelings weren't as easily suppressed. Once again, he felt utterly helpless. He could not tell anyone about his problems, could not allow people to get close to him, otherwise he would have to think of an explanation for not being allowed to bring any friend home, let alone a girl he liked. Derek was tormented by cruel thoughts, often demanding the heavens why what others took for granted was just but an impossible dream for him. Fueled by the hormonal storms, Derek's rage started growing relentlessly. He started having troubles sleeping at night, thinking about all those lovey-dovey couples out there. Derek had knew he was different from them. His creeping flaw wasn't being shy or having a bad case of acne. His problem couldn't be cured by any doctor because it had a name and a surname, Ezio Esposito, his trash bag of a father. Derek started conceiving plan after plan to get rid of him, even if that meant killing him. At night, he would devise elaborate and meticulous plans that often involved prolonging torture, making Ezio suffer like Derek did for all those years. But when morning came, he would always realize it was a dumb plan. More wishful thinking than anything else. Derek lacked the means and the ruthlessness necessary for getting rid of Ezio. No matter how much he hated him, Ezio was still his father, and he was just an angry teenager. Kill Ezio? Sure, and what about then? Live a whole life ridden with guilt? Running away from home to avoid being arrested? And with what money? Killing Ezio would have meant abandoning Carl forever and destroying any possible chances of being happy in the future. So every morning Derek would swallow his plan along with the porridge and move on. His only real prospect was to cram as a madman, get a scholarship, and get out of that hell as fast as possible. Time flew, and in the blink of an eye, it was the last summer before Derek's first year of high school. Despite the hot climate, his heart was cold as ice. Derek had already hit his growth spurt. That, combined with his martial arts and muscle training, had given him a mean look. Ezio was aware of that, and being a coward, had started to avoid beating Derek as much as possible, making Carl the new favorite target. Derek had already tried standing up for his brother, but the only result had been Ezio buying a nice stick from the local army surplus and getting beaten with it instead. That with Ezio's bare hands. He saved Carl from that by begging and crying, and only because the ruckus had alarmed their neighbors. So, whenever Ezio threw one of his tantrums, Derek could only watch his brother getting beaten again and again. Then one morning, Ezio received his first big commission in years, so he wore his best suit despite the heat and had Derek prepare him the briefcase and the laptop. Ezio was in a real hurry. He could not afford his competitors to snatch this whale. It could have been his career-making decision. Derek rushed to the door where Ezio was already waiting and helped him adjust the laptop satchel. Ezio ran to the elevator, pushing the button like a madman, but the light remained red. Cursing his damn condo, the building manager, and his rotten luck, Ezio made a rush to the stairs. And that's when Derek noticed it. Turning his head to follow his father, Derek noticed that the light made odd reflection on the hallway's floor. Ezio had just passed in front of him when he realized the janitor had just washed the stairs but forgot to put the wet floor sign. It happened all in an instant. Ezio made a long, heavy stride, all his weight down and forward, and then his foot slipped. Derek could have warned him, could have even extended an arm and prevented the fall, but instead he chose to remain still. Ezio tumbled down the stairs, bounced on the next alley, and tumbled again, crashing downstairs. His body was a broken mess, all his limbs bent in unnatural angles. As any teenager, Derek had his smartphone at hand, so he started to make several photos to prove that the floor was wet and there was no warning sign. His mind was already planning on hiring the best shark lawyer he could and sue the building managing firm responsible for his condo. Only then he carefully walked down the stairs to confirm Ezio's death. He was there, incapable of making a moan or asking for help, but his eyes were fixated on Derek, begging for help. Derek grinned to him and said, "Do you really think I am so stupid to never learn anything from you? As you more than once taught me, never delegate. If you want something done right, do it yourself. Your smartphone is in your pocket. Take it out and call 911. I'm just a failure of a son. I do not want to mess this up for you, Daddy." Ezio's eyes were full of shock and hate, but that lasted only a moment. His head went limp, his gaze blank. A laughter fought to come out, but Derek suppressed it. Instead, he started shouting for help, putting on his best terrorized son impression. As always, Derek's mother was too obsessed with her problems, her grief, her feelings, to bother looking for the lawyer, leaving everything in Derek's hands since Ezio was no more. 3 birds with one stone. After careful research, he contacted and hired the best shark lawyer they could afford, so that Derek would be his client instead of his mother. He told him everything about his father's incident, the abuse, and the need to make so that the money would split between the 3 of them, mother and sons. Both Derek and Carl were very firm on that point. They wanted the lawyer to start the process to get emancipation. With the money from the compensation and the inheritance, they had enough to be self-sufficient until Derek could provide for them both. What followed was the happiest period in their life. First, they obtained the inheritance, and shortly after they got emancipated and moved away from their mother's place. Not even a month later, they received a very generous settling offer from the building manager. They used it to settle up and make proper plans for the future. During the following years, bullies were not a problem. Derek and Carl were both now martial artists and had each other's back. Finally, they could experience having friends and girlfriends. Their domestic nightmare finally over. They suffered many disappointments though, since too many of those so-called friends turned out to be people that wanted to use their parent-free house as a party house. Also, they had a hard time figuring what being a normal teen was supposed to be. While their peers seemed only interested in having fun and skipping classes, they were focused on studying and saving as much as possible. Derek and Carl would spend holidays and vacation during part-times to slow down the thinning of their bank account. They were not poor, but not rich either. They knew they had to save as much as possible, in case rainy days would once more fall upon them. But all in all, they had a good life. Derek got a scholarship and obtained a bachelor degree in chemistry, soon followed by a master in biochemistry. Carl was doing well too, already got his engineering degree, ready to study for his master, and already had a fiancée. Despite being really happy for his little brother, that was really a painful thorn in Derek's side. He had always been the more socially inept between the two and never managed to get into a stable relationship, not even in college. Derek had no problem talking to girls. The problem always lied in him being picky and ended in his inability to trust. He had many crushes but never fell in love. At the beginning, he put the blame on his bad luck, always finding shallow or idiotic girls. After finding more than one good girl, he put the blame on his dark past. But when confronted with Carl's happy relationship, he could only blame himself. While Carl had suffered almost the same things, he got out much stronger and pure than Derek. Derek was just too scared of being hurt again to let any relationship grow above a certain level, and that was an enemy that he could not just beat up. Derek accepted the first decent paid job he got, working in the night shift of a big chemical company in the Q&A department. Carl has shared with him as a graduation present that he was willing to propose to his fiancée as soon as he got his master's. Hence, Derek needed money because he had only 2 years to save enough to give his little brother a decent wedding. Derek did not like his current job, but it was a way to start his working career and filling his curriculum. Also, it was well paid, and he resolved to use the company insurances to seek for psychological counseling. He knew he had problems and wanted to work them out. Derek consulted several doctors before finding someone he was able to work with, and after several months he felt he was finally starting to make some progress. But alas, such happiness was not bound to last. Supreme Magus, Chapter 3. It was a Friday evening and Derek was getting prepared for work. He was still stuck doing Q&A because the pay was too good, and no matter how many times Carl said he wanted a small ceremony, Derek was sure that whatever they planned to spend, it would at least double in the end. It was a goddamn wedding, hence things were supposed to blow off proportions at some point. That's just how they work. Derek was adjusting his shirt when the smartphone rang on the notes of Night on Ball Mountain, the preset ringtone for unknown numbers. Derek Esposito? Who is this? Mr. Esposito, this is the St. Joseph Hospital. The female voice sounded worried. This, together with the word hospital, sent him a shiver down his spine. Is Carl Esposito your brother? Derek could almost hear her biting her nails. Yes, what happened? He was involved in a car accident and is in a serious condition. You should come here as soon as possible. The doctor needs you since you are his healthcare proxy and the patient is unconscious. A car accident? Derek yelled while rushing out the door and looking for a cab. We don't have any car. What the hell happened? I'm sorry, I'm not at liberty to say. The doctors will explain it. Derek hung up on her. He had no time for useless babbling. Only for a goddamn cab. Every second in the traffic was torture. And when he finally arrived, it was too late. The surgeon and a police officer explained to him that Carl had been run over by a drunk driver. The culprit had run off and the police was still looking for him. A bystander had immediately called 911, but because of the traffic jam caused by the accident, it took hours for the ambulance to arrive. So when Carl arrived at the hospital, he was already in critical condition. He had multiple fractures, ruptured spleen, and internal bleeding, requiring immediate surgery. Derek had been called while Carl was just entering the OR. They had done their best to save him, but Carl had lost too much blood, so there was nothing they could do. They offered Derek their condolences, but all he could hear was white noise. "Let me see my brother," he begged. The body was covered by a sheet, only the head visible. Derek could still see traces of blood on the face of his little brother. Derek left his number to the police officer to be kept updated about the investigation and then returned home. The culprit was quickly apprehended thanks to the traffic cameras. It turned out to be a kid, barely 17 years old, that had stolen his old man's car and then got drunk and high with his friends. Derek lived the months before the trial in anguish. The damn DA had decided to prosecute him as a minor. An even more damn judge had granted him house arrest, all while his little brother, his Carl, was dead because of him. How could they do such a thing? Derek would yell and argue with anyone willing to listen to him. Why all this talking about the rights and the future of that little shit? What about my brother's rights? What about his future? Carl has none because of him. What kind of justice is that? Derek visited multiple times the DA office, expressing his outrage and demanding them to ask for the maximum sentence. They were always kind and accommodating and promised him that they would not forget about Carl. When the day of the trial finally came, Derek's world died one more time. The DA and the defense attorney had come to a settlement. Since Chris Wainwright, this was the name of the murderer, was still a minor and was also his first offense, he had accepted to go in rehab and do 600 hours of community service. If Chris would complete his rehab program and did not commit crimes in the next 3 years, he then would be a free citizen with no criminal record. Derek was too dumbfounded to even be angry. When the session was over, he just walked to the DA and asked a single question with a muffled voice. "Why?" And then, with their most kind and accommodating tone, the DA assistants explained to Derek that Chris was just a kid from a good family that had made a dumb mistake. He had a brilliant future ahead. Chris had already been admitted to a Caltech, and this was his first offense. Also, his parents had hired a great lawyer, and the judge would likely be unwilling to destroy Chris' life. Despite their expectation, Derek did not make a scene. Derek's fire was extinguished. He had no more tears to shed. In the following days, Derek lived by going through the motions. He kept following his routine like nothing had happened, his brain still refusing everything that happened in the last half year. The only thing that made him feel alive was that constant headache that had started shortly after Carl's death. According to his doctor, it was a stress-related symptom, so all that happened. Derek had just been swallowing aspirins and paracetamol like they were candies. But the pain never did go away. Instead, it was getting worse. Derek finally found the strength to get a serious checkup, and once again, bad news were waiting for him. According to the full body scan and the follow-up biopsy, he had stage 2 pulmonary cancer. "But I never smoked in my whole life," Derek explained, more amused than scared. Indeed, it's odd. Dr. Monroe, his oncologist, was quite puzzled. She was a good-looking Hispanic woman, maybe 5 years older than Derek. In another moment, he would have probably asked her out. You told me you work for a chemical company, right? Derek nodded. Such an aggressive cancer is too uncommon to be a coincidence. My personal opinion is that their ventilation system failed. You and God knows how many more people have been breathing poison from quite some time. But we wear masks the whole time we work with the chemicals. And speaking for myself, I follow the safety protocols to the letter. My colleagues always mock me for it. Derek was in disbelief. Then maybe the masks are cheap pieces of junk, or maybe the lab or the storage, if not both, have leaks. These corporate scumbags only seek profits. It would not surprise me in the least if they cut from the safety budget to put more dividends in their pockets. Dr. Monroe was too outraged. Even in his catatonic state, Derek could tell there was more to it. Doctor, what are you hiding from me? He asked, looking her straight in the eyes for the first time. She nibbled on her lower lip for a while before answering. Between you and me, you are not the first case from your company. I have already reported it to the Department of Health and to the federals. If I were in your shoes, I would get a good lawyer and sue the soul out of them. You'll need a lot of money for the treatments. I agree on the lawyer, but I refuse any treatment. I'll just take palliative care. Dr. Monroe jumped from her chair. Do you realize that without the proper treatments, you have 6 months, a year at best to live? Also, as I have already said, your cancer is really aggressive. We need to start as soon as possible if we want a chance to beat it. The situation was dramatic, but Derek found all those wee words hilarious, so he could not refrain from chuckling. We barely know each other, doctor, so we have nothing to do if not going separate ways, Derek said to her with an icy tone. What do I have to live for? I have no family, no loved ones. My little brother's ashes are all that is left to keep me company. I could die tomorrow and I would not give a damn. They parted on bad terms, but she still gave him her number in case he changed his mind or simply needed to talk. Derek called his old shark lawyer and explained everything. Years had passed, but they would still send each other Christmas cards. Derek had kept tabs on him just in case. He had now more gray hair than before, but was still a first-class shark. Derek stopped going to work and started spending his money without much care. He would go to all the fancy restaurants he had always wanted to try, bought the suits he always dreamed about, and only ate his favorite foods for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Derek would spend most of his days playing games on his brand new PC and revisiting all the spots that held a significance for him and Carl. Then, 24 days after the diagnosis, he had an epiphany. Supreme Magus, Chapter 4, Fall and Ascensions. It was a night like all the others since he had quit his job. Derek would wear one of his new suits and wander off the city to see what would kill him first, the cancer or random crazy head. Once reach exhaustion or simply boredom, he would then take a cab and get back home. Derek was walking with quick strides, high on his medication, when he saw him, Chris Wainwright. He was holding a bottle of liquor hidden inside a paper bag from which he would drink in big gulps. Chris was talking and laughing loudly with a teen girl that was showing a lot of skin. She was holding a joint, taking big puffs until they traded and got into a car. It was a custom-painted muscle car, not the same Camaro that had used to kill Carl. It was even bigger and more expensive. In that moment, Derek wanted to puke blood. How could he possibly have forgotten about that little bastard? Had his cancer really screwed up his brain so bad to be willing to let such a loose end slip? The tires screeched and the car started suddenly, almost running over a woman that was crossing the road. The skimpily dressed girl rolled down the window, yelling insults at the woman that was still frozen in fear. Derek could almost hear that couple of idiots laughing. Gritting his teeth, he called a cab and started to plan his final act. First, he started to stalk Chris on all social networks, learning all his routines and habits. Then, Derek began to follow him and planted a GPS tracker under the Camaro to always know his exact location. Simply skimming through Chris' cipher, he found at least 50 violations of the parole deal. While following him, Derek took many photos of Chris abusing alcohols and drugs. But Derek had no intention to submit the evidence to the police. What could he possibly gain from that? Chris would just get another slap on the wrist and then start being more careful. Derek had not the luxury of time nor the willingness of doing what the so-called justice system was supposed to do. Less than a week later, by checking Chris' Bookface page, Derek learned of a rave he would participate to. Derek double-checked his equipment and jumped into his new car, a black 1967 Chevrolet Impala, the best car to hunt monsters with. The rave was secret, hence, it would take place in some run-down abandoned location. Derek followed Chris closely, and as soon as they were away from traffic cams, he ran into the Camaro from the side, forcing Chris to a halt. As soon as Chris stepped down from the car, Derek took him down with a stun gun, and then quickly proceeded to check if the Camaro had more passengers. It seemed to be his lucky night. Chris was driving alone. Derek searched him and crushed every electronic device he could find, Bitfit, smartphone, even Chris' keychain. Derek tied his hands and feet and ball-gagged him. Then he destroyed his own smartphone and the GPS tracker, tossing everything outside the road. Then he moved Chris in the trunk of the Impala, headed toward a party only for the two of them. Derek drove to an abandoned warehouse in the old industrial area. He had already gotten rid of the lock and chain that kept the big metallic doors closed, replacing them with his own. Inside the warehouse, there were only 2 chairs, both bolted to the ground, and a bucket and several water tanks. Derek opened the trunk, discovering that Chris had regained his senses, so he tased him again. Then he took Chris to a chair and started tightly binding his arms and legs to it. Then Derek splashed him with a bucket of water, forcing him to regain focus. Hello, Chris. My name is Derek Esposito, and you killed my brother. We need to talk. Chris tried getting out of the restraint, and while commending his effort, Derek violently hit him in the groin with a nightstick. The pain paralyzed him. Where was I? Oh, yes. The last time we saw each other was during your first trial. Do you remember me? Chris, panting, intensified. Good. Let's get straight to business. Derek took 2 digital timers out of the car, setting the first to 30 minutes and the second to 2 hours, 44 minutes and 16 seconds. Then he pulled out a gun and double shot Chris' liver. His scream was muffled by the gag ball, but the shots echoed loudly in the empty warehouse. Derek started both timers simultaneously and came in close, checking the blood. It was dense and black, a clear indicator of a crushed liver. Now, before the real pain settles in, I need you to take a good look to the timers. They are really important. Chris was crying and screaming, so Derek had to splash him again and pull him by the hair to get his attention. The first timer marks how much time you have left. After it rings, even if someone should miraculously break through that door and rescue you, you would be dead anyway. You have only so much time until your system gets flooded by toxin unfiltered by the liver to the point that no transplant can save you. The second timer is a surprise. We'll get to it in time. For now, your only task is to stay awake and savor every moment of pain, like Carl did. Time flew. Chris kept screaming through the gag, and soon the first timer rang. Chris started sobbing even stronger, sometimes stopping only because he was overwhelmed by the constantly rising pain. Derek would speak to him no longer. He would just pace back and forth, occasionally checking the second timer. Every time Chris fainted, Derek would splash him and force him to stay awake before refilling the bucket. When the second timer rang, Derek finally spoke again. I have bad news and I have good news. The bad news is that I lied before. I thoroughly researched liver injuries, and with such crushed liver, you had no hope to begin with. Even if I had shot you in front of the best hospital in the USA, unless they had a compatible liver at hand, you would have died. I wanted to give you false hope, as it happened to my brother while waiting for help. The good news is that you just suffered as long as Carl did. I may be many things: unrelenting, vengeful, a liar, a murderer, but I am also fair. So your suffering ends now. Derek pointed the gun to Chris' head and double shot him. Then he pointed to his own head. Little brother, I'm coming. Wait for me. And he pulled the trigger one last time. While Derek's body was failing, his consciousness was basking in light, and he felt pulled towards the sky. After months of grieving, a whole lifetime of misery and pain, Derek felt that all his traumas and hatred were fading away. Derek had never experienced such a bliss. In this new form, he felt no negative emotions. He was in peace with his past, unafraid of his future. Derek was enjoying a present that he felt could lead to endless possibilities. And there was no right and wrong, success or failure. He would simply be, no strings attached. That intoxicating feeling lasted until he suddenly woke up, alive and breathing. All his negative emotion returned, plunging him back into despair. Derek cursed inwardly while trying to focus his eyes. Maybe it was because of the shot to the head, but his vision was blurry. So much for the perfect plan. Some idiot must have rescued me, and somehow I survived the journey to the hospital. I'm still alive. I still have cancer. I am still alone. But when his eyes finally cleared up, they strongly disagree with his reasoning. Derek was in some kind of a huge metal corridor surrounded by dead bodies. Alien dead bodies, to be precise. They were all wearing some kind of full body armor that resembled some kind of sci-fi spacesuit. Where the hell am I? What the hell does this mean? He screamed while trying to get up, only to fall back on the floor. He fell hand first, and only then he noticed that he was wearing a spacesuit too, and that his hands, all four of them, had 3 fingers each. What the actual hell? Supreme Magus, Chapter 5, Collateral Damage. After much screaming and freaking out, Derek finally regained his composure and started to analyze his current predicament. The first thing that captured his eyes was a huge hole in the spacesuit at the chest level. The contours of the hole had burn marks all over, and there was a lot of purple jelly on both his suit and the dead bodies. That meant the purple jelly was coagulated alien blood. Derek turned his head to see the spot where he had woken up, noticing a lot of blood, even something that he found safe to assume were some kind of splattered viscera. This makes no sense, he thought. All the evidence points to the fact that this body was dead as Julius Caesar until I somehow happened to inhabit it, and for whatever reason, it's also fully healed. Oh man, this means all religions are dead wrong. Luckily, I never believed in any mumbo jumbo. Otherwise, I would be really disappointed right now. Derek then proceeded examining his new body. It had 4 arms, only 2 legs, but all the limbs were long and skinny. The legs were reverse jointed, like those of a cat. Both hands and feet had only 3 fingers each. Derek was really curious about his facial features, but there was no reflective surface in sight. So he tried feeling his face with the fingers, but the suit turned out to come with a helmet, which did not impede his senses though. The only thing he could establish was the shape of the helmet, and based on it, Derek knew head should have been something similar to a shark dorsal fin. Then he tried to speak. Test, test, Derek Esposito. 1, 2, 3. He could somehow do it, but it was still English. That meant that he did not inherit neither the muscle memory nor the intellect from the body's previous owner. Derek tried getting up, but the center of gravity was too different from his old body, so he had to give up and proceed crawling like a baby. He started examining the corpses to make heads or tail of what was happening around him. Judging from the suits, there were two factions at war. One had the red colored spacesuit, and the other, which Derek was donning, was gray. He had no idea which side was winning, but it would not make any difference to him anyway. Unless the suit was equipped with an universal translator, he was incapable of communicating. Enemies would kill him on sight. Alice would probably ditch him like garbage. Who would ever want a rambling idiot incapable even of walking during a life or death situation? I'm not even here for a day and I'm already as good as dead. Refusing to give up, Derek managed to get up by leaning on the walls and started exploring. The corridor had many doors, yet his choices were painfully limited, since he could only go through the open ones. Derek had no idea how to open the doors nor how to operate the control panels that he found along the way. He tried pushing buttons at random, but nothing happened. And he was starting to get hungry. Will I die like this, starving in a goddamn spaceship, alien planet, whatever is this? I don't know what this useless pile of flesh is. Even if I stumble on a mountain of food, I have no way to know what is what. And even if I did, I don't know how the heck to remove this helmet. After walking for several hours, hunger and frustration drove him to hysteria. Derek screamed and kicked whatever was within reach until exhaustion made him fall asleep. When he woke up, his mind was clear again. This is a nightmare. I'm all out of options, to the point that even if I wanted to kill myself, I would not know how. He banged the back of his head against the wall to keep frustration at bay. I never thought about this, but being reborn in a sci-fi environment is truly the worst case scenario. Alien body, alien customs, complete lack of new species common sense, and to make things worse, everything here is so high-tech that I cannot even operate a door. Heck, every goddamn button could be tagged and it would still be useless to me, since I don't know their language. His hunger was rising and he was feeling weaker by the hour. Having no time to lose, he started wandering again, this time banging and screaming at every door he met, trying to draw some attention. Derek was on the verge of fainting again due to hunger and exhaustion when finally a door opened up. The shock was great enough for him to lose his grip and fall to the ground. On the other side were gray-suited aliens in wedge formation. Every one of them was holding some kind of long metal staff, as it was a rifle. Derek didn't even attempt to get up. He just waved the right hand, hoping it was a peace sign. "Captain, that's Sark. His life signal getting back online wasn't a glitch in the system. He is still alive." The formation opened and a taller and bulkier alien closed in. The soldiers never lowered their weapons nor lost focus, waiting for the attack order. "What are you doing on the floor, soldier? And how in Tark's name did you survive that ambush?" the captain asked with a coarse voice. "Dude, I have no idea what you just said." "What is he rambling? Medic, any reading on that blaster wound?" A purple-dressed alien walked forward while scanning Derek's body. "None, sir. It's not any dialect in the Empire, and the scanner confirms that the hole in his armor is definitely from Corellan blaster. I have no idea how he survived unscathed. It's a miracle." "It's a liability." The captain's tone was grim. He took a staff from a soldier's hand, and by pushing a button, it became a glaive, whose blade was made of pure energy. "Well, seems that I'm going to die from a lightsaber. It's cool. One hit and I'll be turned into dandruff. Lucky me. Another painless death incoming." When the captain plunged the glaive into his chest, it did not make any burning sound. It pierced him from side to side, bleeding him to death. The blade was not a laser-based weapon, but a hard light construct, making it no different from an ordinary glaive. "Listen up, soldiers. Sark was a good soldier, and we will remember and mourn him as such, when and if we get out of this alive. But that thing, whatever that is a risk we cannot allow to make. Not with Prince Reckhart in our care and those Corellan rebels come still at large. Better some collateral damage than a spy among our ranks. Now shut that door and check the perimeter again." This time, death was far from painless for Derek. He felt like his chest was on fire, but what really hurt wasn't the wound as much as his lungs. Derek was struggling to breathe. Every breath was shallower and most difficult than the last. Blood started gurgling from his mouth, and he felt like slowly drowning. His throat kept contracting, trying to draw air in, but to no avail. It took Derek less than a minute to die, but for him it seemed to last forever. Once again, he found himself basked by a blinding light and pulled towards it. Just like the last time, he felt all his worries and rage fading. But instead of enjoying the feeling, he was simply annoyed. Derek had never believed in any god, hence he never believed in heaven or hell. Humankind has always been a terrible race, he thought. It's impossible to define someone as truly bad. Most of the times, bad guys are simply people who never get the chance to be anything but criminals. Then there are people like me whom life have pushed and pushed until they broke. Not to mention psycho and sociopaths. How could someone that is born bad be sent to hell simply because his head is malfunctioning? Hence, I have always believed that either there was an afterlife for everyone or no afterlife at all. Death is supposed to be the final spirit level. Good or bad, rich or poor, the destination has to be the same. Instead, I got this cheap excuse of reincarnation screwing with me. What purpose being reborn could possibly have if I retain all my memories? Whatever body or planet I would end up in, I would still carry my baggage. So, once outside the light, all pain, rage, and contempt toward humankind would prevent me to learn whatever lesson I am supposed to learn. Inside the otherworldly space, he had the clarity to see that his psychologist was only half right. He could only change if he wanted to. But because of all his past experience, he had no will to. It was a perfect example of a catch-22 paradox. Suddenly, he was pulled downwards and away from the light. His vision was a blur, but he could still hear a lot of commotion around him. Giant hands were holding him still, while he was puking God knows what, and, judging from the breeze on his butt cheeks, he was naked. I don't know what the heck is going on, he thought, but I bet I'm in deep shit again. When Derek finally able to see again, he discovered that the hands were not gigantic. The issue was him being very small, a baby to be precise. He's alive! I did it! I managed to save your boy's life. A further inspection revealed that said hands belonged to some gibberish rambling old hag. Derek was currently inside a wooden shack, surrounded by people dressed with rags that could be called clothes only if they were part of 1000 AD themed Renaissance fair. Man, I hate being always right. Supreme Magus, Chapter 6, A New Beginning. He is alive! I did it! I managed to save your boy's life. After the midwife triumphantly said those words, the room exploded in cheers and tears of joy. The people in the room were hugging each other. Meanwhile, Derek lay limp in the midwife's arm, looking left and right, trying to determine how bad was his current situation. Well, what do we have here? The bedridden woman is clearly this body's mother. She definitely needs a bath. After delivery, the sheets were stained with blood and urine and feces. The crying, rough-looking man should be the father. I wonder if he's crying for my sake or just because he was afraid of losing his wife. I bet the second one. Then I have a bigger brother and a sister. This is bad. Suddenly, another woman entered the bedroom, bringing with her a little boy and a girl that raced to the bedridden woman. Oh, damn it. This is even worse than I thought. So far, I have only two possible choices. Option 1. Grow into this large family, fighting every day for the few available resources. Malnourishment is most definitely a given. Then, when I am old enough, starting to work with the father and brothers, getting married, having children, etc., etc. Option 2. Wait until I am tall enough to grab sharp objects, put me out of my misery, and take another spin hoping for a better outcome. I think I'll go with option number 2. Meanwhile, the room was silent. The midwife had already finished cleaning the newborn, wrapped him up in a clean cloth. During all this time, Derek neither moved or cried. "Nana, what's wrong with the baby? Why he is not crying? It never happened before." The mother was worried and, ignoring the pain, was trying to get up. "Shush, child, and don't you dare move. I still have to heal you." The midwife's tone did not leave space for a reply. "I deliver dozens of children, and a silent one is rare, but nothing special. Do you want to see how strong he is? There you go." She unwrapped him from the cloth and, while holding him gently, gave a little spanking to force him to cry. Derek grunted a little while staring at her in dismay. "Want to play rough, old hag?" he thought. "Fine. You just triggered my trap card. Twin flood, activate." And out of the blue, he relieved both his bowels and bladder. Derek started giggling loudly. "Well, this wasn't exactly what I was expecting, but as you can hear for yourself, this little imp is breathing just fine." The midwife handed the baby to another woman to clean him. Derek kept giggling, proud of his work. After washing her face with warm water and a cloth, the old hag moved her left index finger, drawing a circle in the air, striking it through the middle from right to left. Then she pronounced a single word, "Ekidu." A black energy manifested from her fingertip. She produced to point it over her wet dress and then over her shoes. The smell of feces and urine suddenly disappeared, and so did their source. With his mouth agape in shock, Derek watched as his poop would dry and crumble, turning into dust. It was akin to watching one of those fast-forward videos where in 1 minute you could see a seed becoming a flower. Heinsberg bird! She is not just an old midwife. She is a real magician in the flesh. I have never been so happy in my whole 3 lives of being so dead wrong. Derek was ecstatic, and not only because that world had magic, but also because as soon as he heard the word Ekidu, he felt something clicking inside of him, like something deep inside him had started taking root and suddenly had become ingrained in the very fabric of his new reality. He started repeating obsessively the magic word in his mind and trying to engrave in his memory every detail of the circular finger movement. "Now that I am clean, let me stop that bleeding, dear." The healer approached the mother and placed her hands above her nether regions. "Is it time for another magic? Show me, please," Derek begged in his mind. Nana first spread her fingers wide, then started to move both arms in circular motion, first up over her head, then he opened her arms as much as she could before joining her hands, palm against backhand, at her navel's height. "Venire Lakhat." Derek, all wrapped up, tried to mimic all her movements, memorizing every single detail he could grasp, no matter how small. A sphere, of light enveloped Derek's mother's lower body, and she quickly recovered her complexion. The pale skin reverted to a healthy pink, while all the traces of pain and fatigue disappeared from her face. Once again, something clicked inside him. After the dark magic, he could clearly feel that simply by hearing the power word, a connection had been established between him and light magic. Derek could not stop grinding. If, and I say if, I have enough magical talent, it would mean there is actually a third hidden option, he thought, and I can become a magician and live free for the first time in my life. No shackles, no responsibility. But it's better not to get over enthusiastic. With my luck, I could just have a poor talent or... His reasoning was abruptly interrupted. The woman had held him until that moment. The woman that had held him until that moment was handing him to his mother. Nana, are you sure he is all right? He has yet to cry and giggle or not. He is too quiet. With all that happened, I am really afraid that something is wrong with him. After those words, the noisy room turned gloomy. Afraid that he was somehow responsible and quite eager to explore option number 3, Derek did his best baby impression, giggling, smiling, and doing raspberry sounds. Nana felt her professional pride hurt by such allegation, but it wasn't her first time with an anxious mother. She knew Elena since she was still a child and had delivered all her babies. Nana could not deny that this delivery had been one of the most difficult of her career. The labor had lasted hours and she had been forced to cast healing spells multiple times to stop the bleeding. When she finally could see the baby's head, she knew something was wrong. Elena was fighting with all her strength, but the baby was limp. So she had rushed and used her hands to pull out the baby as fast as possible, only to discover that he was being strangled by his own umbilical cord. After cutting it and removing it, she had tried all her best spells, but to no avail. For a whole terrible minute, Nana had believed the child was lost. But then, the healing light had finally activated, forcing the baby to puke, clearing his airway. Then and only then Nana started affording the luxury of relaxing. Healing magic was no miracle. It could enhance the life force of the patient, making easier to recover from an illness or healing from an injury, but it could not create life. Nana was sensitive, so she understood that Elena didn't need a lesson about magic just to be reassured about her child's health. Worry not, my child. I can prove it to you that all is well. With a warm smile, she caressed Elena's cheek and took Derek from her arms, removing the cloth like she was revealing a treasure. Nana carefully adjusted Derek in the crook of her left arm. Then she circled her open right hand all around him and said, "Venire Ratu." A small wisp of light came out of her palm, dancing around the baby before penetrating his chest. The light spread from head to toe, making him emit a dim light. See, if there was even a scratch on his body, my injury detecting spell would leave that area bleak. Your little son is fine. The energy flowing through his body was making Derek feel empowered. In his old life, he had felt like that only few times. When he got his degree, when he finally abandoned his parents' house, when he beat up the bullies. But all those times it had been a fleeting emotion, lasting few seconds at best. Now it was different. It wasn't just adrenaline. Real magic, real power was coursing through every fiber of his being, making him feel invincible. So when the spell started fading off, he could not accept that. No, come back to me. Give me my power back, Derek screamed inwardly. He focused on the last strands of energy, willing it for them to stay. He could not cast the spell on his own, but he could still feel the lingering power and starting feeding it with its own. Derek's light stopped dimming and instead grew stronger and stronger. Nana was dumbfounded. She had never seen anything like that before. That was not how the spell was supposed to work. Derek wanted it to last forever, but a second later he fell asleep due to the mana exhaustion, and the light disappeared quickly. Nana wrapped up the baby again and returned him to his mother's embrace. Nana, what was that? Elena asked, full of wonder. The old healer had no idea how to answer. Many possibilities popped in her head, and all of them would require long explanation that would needlessly make Elena worry and maybe even forcing Nana to repeat the spell. It had been a long day, and she had no intention of prolonging it even a second more than necessary. So she borrowed a line from her childhood's favorite fairy tale. My child, I think the newborn baby may be blessed by the light. There is no need to worry, only to rejoice. Supreme Magus, Chapter 7, A Baby's Day. Derek's first days as a baby were peaceful, but far from boring. He had no responsibilities. All he had to do was eat, sleep, poop, and the occasional baby noise or finger-grabbing routine. That left him with all the time he needed to think about his future. On Earth, it was no mystery that kids had a greater potential for learning than adults. And since his family seemed human, or at least human-like, he could hope for that to be true in this dimension. From what he could see, his body was no different from an earthborn baby. He could hear his heartbeat, his chest inflating and deflating while breathing. Even the reproductive apparatus was the same. The same could be said for his new family. If it wasn't for the existence of magic, he would have simply thought to have traveled through time. But things clearly weren't that simple. Derek quickly dismissed all the what race I am now hypothesis as overthinking. One of the advantages of being a baby was that ignorance was perfectly fine. When the time came, someone would teach him. He determined that he had two priorities. Number one, learn their language. All babies are supposed to learn their native language. And he had only so much time before being considered a retard. So he could not slack off. Number two, he had somehow to figure out magic, or at least its foundations. And that also had a deadline, since his learning potential was at its peak only until his brain stopped growing. After that, he would not be different from anyone else with the same talent and disposition for magic. So, he set magic as his first priority. Being considered a slow learner was much better than being weak for life and forced to take another spin at reincarnation. Derek spent his first day in the new world in bed, together with his mother, while his father would sleep and rest in the boys' room. Whenever someone talked to him, he paid close attention, trying to figure out common words or patterns. The rest of the time, when he was not eating or his cloth diaper being changed, he would try to cast one of the 3 spells he knew: Ekidu, Venire Lacat, and Venire Ratu. Every attempt was a failure. He could not even feel a iota of power inside him. Comparing what he saw from what he knew from Earth's dungeons and looting, those spells had clearly a verbal and somatic component. But that couldn't be all, or at least he hoped so. Otherwise, until he was able to talk, his efforts would have been wasted. Failure after failure, his anxiety grew stronger. Fear of the unknown and of tomorrow started to build up. Also, getting used to poop and wet himself wasn't a pleasant feeling either. Thankfully, his mother showered him up with nothing but love and affection, making his day not a total loss. Despite his bias about mothers, due to his previous life, Elena managed to make him feel loved and protected. That wasn't half bad at all. The final outcome of his first day was 0 progress in magic, no progress with language. But his mother seemed to be a good parent, and he finally learned his new name, Lit. The second day turned his world upside down. Elena, showing the strength of a wild ox, decided she was sick of resting and got up and helped doing the daily chores. Lid had the opportunity to see her full figure. Despite giving birth the previous day, she was a good-looking woman in her early 20s. She was definitely well endowed in all the right places, with a fit body honed through hard work. Her long hair was of a beautiful light brown color with shades of red all over it. The light of the candle made it look like there were flames dancing within. Seeing Mother with her hair down in a sunny day must be quite a sight to behold, Derek thought. Maybe it was because Lid was still a baby. Maybe because of the mother-son bonding, but Lid felt deeply proud of her. He also discovered that she seemed not to use bra or underpants. Once dressed, she wrapped up Lid, making it impossible for him to move. Then Elena placed him into her sash, using it like a baby cradle, so that she could easily hold him with only one arm and minimum exertion. She walked out of the small bedroom and found her older daughter, Eliza, messing with the fireplace. "What in the great mother's name do you think you're doing, Lily? The sun is not even out. You should be sleeping. You know you're not allowed to mess with fire," she said with a hiss, trying not to wake up the house. "I'm sorry, Mom. I just wanted to make you all a surprise. Let you wake up in a warm house and with breakfast ready." Elisa's face showed only sincere concern. "There's no need to worry, silly bee. Your mommy is a pro with kids," Elena said while ruffling her hair. Eliza, together with her twin brother, were the eldest children. She was 8 years old, and her blonde hair with shades of black was the reason for her moniker. Elena shooed her away from the fireplace with a flick of finger in Firo, lighted the fire. Thanks heavens, Lit rejoiced. Once again I had that weird feeling when discovering a new type of magic. This proves I wasn't just imagining stuff. Elena sent Lily opening the window shutters to let the dawn light in while she prepared breakfast. Elena took several vegetables out of the cabinet and proceeded chopping them with a knife. Some had familiar look to it, like some semi-potatoes and odd-colored carrots. The others were all a mystery. The idea of having such breakfast made Lit almost cry. In his past life, he never liked vegetables. They were all bland tasting. No matter how much of them he ate, within a half an hour, he would be hungry again. Elena shoved everything inside a small copper cauldron and with the help of a hook, hung it on a metal bar over the fire. Then with a finger snap, she conjured water out of nowhere, filling the cauldron. Both Lit and Eliza were ecstatic, even though for completely different reasons. For Lit, it meant hope. Spells could be casted without words or precise hand movements, and that showed him that there was a real chance for him to practice magic while still being baby. For Eliza, was a reason of pride. Magic was common, but every time Elena casted a silent spell, it was like watching a real magician at work. "You are so amazing, Mom." Eliza's eyes were full of admiration. "Will I ever be as good as you with magic?" "Of course you will, silly bee," Elena replied with a kind smile, while inwardly adding, "after 10 plus years of chores every single day." After a while, everyone woke up to have breakfast together. The family consisted of Roz, father, Elena, 2 daughters, Eliza and Tista, and 2 sons, Orpel and Tryon. Lit could then establish with depressing certainty that there was no such thing as an indoor bathroom. From what he could see, the house consisted of a big room used as a dining room, kitchen, and 3 doors that led to the bedrooms. Nothing else. The breakfast was relatively quiet, so he had no problems learning the word for water magic when his father filled some jugs. Jorun. After everyone left their daily routine, Elena moved along with Lit to a rocking chair. During the morning, he had the pleasure to discover that in the new world, the daily chores like washing the dishes or cleaning the floors were all performed using magic. From her rocking chair, Elena would simply twirl her index and medium fingers while reciting Breza to generate up to 3 small whirlwinds that she would move all around the house to collect and get rid of the dust. Whenever someone would dirty the floor with earth or mud, a flick of the wrist and Magna would send them back through the same door where they brought it in. Lit was delighted discovering how common the use of magic was. Everyone in the family, even the youngest one, would use magic to make their life easier. When bedtime arrived, Lit was dying to try some magic. He had waited so long for his hands and feet to be finally free. Elena fell almost instantly asleep, Yet Lit was impatient enough to be under the impression of having waited for hours. After a full day of thinking, he had decided to try only air magic first, until he was confident enough in his magic control abilities. Fire was just too dangerous for a novice, while water and light would easily wake up his mother. He could not spot any dirt to control in the dim light of the room, and was too afraid to mess up with darkness magic until he got a better understanding of it. So he twirled his little arm and said, "Yeah!" Nothing happened. Lee tried and failed countless times before giving up. He did not know how long his baby body would have lasted until falling asleep, so he stopped despairing and started thinking. Magic was common. Whenever he heard for the first time an elemental magic word, something inside him would click, like creating a connection with the elemental energy. Those were all good news, but he still couldn't make head of tails why he was always falling. He never expected succeeding at the first try, but he had thought that something would have manifested. A random tiny gust of wind, a magic spark, anything would do. So he started thinking back to when the healer had filled him with power. That feeling was not new to him, but he never experienced it so intense. Let's search his memory until he found the answer. It was the same sensation that he had when he was started practicing Aikido while learning the basic breathing technique. Well, I have nothing to lose. Let's give it a try. Lit breathed into his diaphragm. The lower belly relaxed to get the world energy in. Then he would contract the lower belly, holding the breath for some seconds to let the energy settle in before breathing out, relaxing his whole body. Back on Earth, he always thought that the intoxicating feeling he experienced during his first days of practice was just some kind of placebo effect. His naive young mind deluded itself that we could miraculously become strong just by believing and practicing in all that key internal energy nonsense. But what if he later stopped experiencing that sensation only because his native world energy was just too thin? After some time, Lit started to feel a tingle around his body. And then the energy seemed to move and condense inside his solar plexus. The more he performed the breathing technique, more clearly he could sense the energy getting more stable. In his old video games, mana was always blue, so he visualized the blue sphere settling inside his plexus. After a while, Lit felt brimming with power. After holding his breath one last time, he twirled his little arm before commanding, "Yeah!" The wind generated barely tweaked his mother's hair, while he had aimed for the blanket. Yet, he could not stop grinding. This is really a great start. Supreme Magus, Chapter 8, Unrelenting Practice. In the following weeks, Lit days consisted of a strict routine. During the day, when he was all wrapped up, he would only focus on practicing the breathing technique and learning as much as he could about his family and their language. At night, he would practice magic until exhaustion made him fall asleep. Then, as soon as he woke up, he would start again until Elena would get up for the day. More than once he tried taking a break, but it would never last long. Living as a baby was not easy. On the contrary, was very stressful. He could not speak, even the words he had already understood, to not scare his family. He could not move. He could do nothing but watch, sleep, eat, and relieve his bowel. He was not used to be so helpless and dependent on someone else for every little thing. Too much free time would bring him to the verge of insanity. So, he would practice and practice trying to adjust to his new reality without overthinking it about how absurd or irrational was his situation. As Lid's powers increased, so did his control, and after a few weeks he felt confident enough to try earth magic and water magic. He would always be careful, never conjuring more than a few droplets of water or manipulating a handful of dirt. He discovered that it was possible to make the elements float in midair, change their shape and size by continuously spending mana. After that, he shifted his night training on focus and control rather than power. His mana was very limited, and he much preferred doing few elaborate tricks perfectly rather than a lot of stuff at the risk of blowing his cover. No matter how common magic was, Lit doubted that a baby practicing it would be any less than shocking or even terrifying. Lit was afraid of being abandoned by his family, or even worse, killed. He was once again scared of death, since now he had too much to lose. What were the odds to find another world where magic existed, to be born as a baby in a loving family? 0. None. Nada. Squat. He had to play his cards well and play them as close to the chest as possible. Before revealing even a hint of his talent, he needed to know what the standards of that world were. How much talent was considered good, how much divided being considered a genius from being labeled as a monster. His mind was constantly filled with worries, and training would alleviate his anxiety. After 3 months, he had become good enough at silent magic to try fire magic on the fireplace. The fire was already lit, and when everyone was busy talking and eating during breakfast, he tried making the flames dance at will. It ended up in a failure, since the flames were too strong and the distance too big for his mana to have any effect. Yet he kept trying, since he could still sense the flow of magic going from himself to the fireplace, hence making it a good training to expand his mana sense and range. The only downside of all that training was that Lit would get hungry faster. Luckily, he was not Elena's first glutton, and she had no shortage of milk. Another month passed, and Elena started weaning him. This event was meaningful for 2 reasons. The first was Lit noticing that food wasn't abundant in his household. So even if he still had not a rich vocabulary, he could still read his parents' worried expression every time he needed to be fed. Despite being a cold-hearted, cynical misanthrope at his core, Lit could not help but feel guilty about it. They loved him like a child, while he would consider them nothing more than hosts, like a parasite. The only exceptions were Elena and Eliza, his big sister, the only one that, along with his mother, would take care of him. With their constant love, affection, and care, had managed to crack his emotional defensive wall. The more time he spent with them, the more he would consider them part of his real family, not just people that he was leading by the nose. So, he started limiting his training to not exceed the amount of food they could afford. Even that required quite a few tries to find the right amount, since too little would cause even more worry than too much. The second reason were world-changing discoveries. Being forced to stop training magic as much as possible, Lit now had free time and that he used to dedicate that time by practicing the breathing technique that he Christianized accumulation. That way, his inner energy that he had long dubbed as mana core grew faster to the point of hitting a bottleneck. Apparently, his body wasn't big or strong enough or both to hold an indefinite amount of mana. He'd never noticed it before because his baby body was rapidly growing and he had only so much time to expand the mana core. So, without realizing it, his body and mana core had developed together. But now the balance had been broken, and practicing accumulation would make every fiber of his body age, so he was forced to stop. Luckily, he was still well fed and developing fast, so despite not being able doing any physical exercise, that bottlenecks would not last long. The secondary discovery was the result of him being forced not to practice magic or use accumulation. While studying his bottleneck status, he found out that it was possible to modify the breathing technique by removing the breath-holding step. That way, the world energy would just flow in and out of his body, energize him like a good night's sleep. Lit named this new technique invigoration. After several tries, he discovered that the world's mana could allow him to stay awake for several days, but not indefinitely. Each time he would use invigoration, the energizing effect would last less and less, and only sleeping will reset its effectiveness. But the most important discovery, as almost always happens, was made by chance. After adjusting his food intake, Lit's greatest enemy had become the hunger. Not the slight appetite that can be fixed by a candy bar or the hankering after a busy morning. It was the kind of hunger that never goes away, always lurking, even right after a meal. Even though Lit was not starving, it was something that he had never experienced. Even among all the misfortunes of his life, food had never been an issue. He had always been able to eat to his heart's content, even allowing himself to be picky about food. But now he was so hungry that he ate until the last bite, and if his body had allowed him to, he would not hesitate licking the plate clean. In the good days, when the portions were larger, it was like white noise, annoying but easily ignored. But during the bad days, either because the ratios were smaller or because he had lost himself in the practice of magic, consuming too much mana, it would become a thorn in his head. He would be so hungry to have a headache all day long, often feeling lightheaded and incapable of focusing. Food would be the only thing he would think or dream about. Of course, he was not the only hungry one in the family. Aside from Elena, only his siblings, Orpal and Eliza, would be tasked to feed him. And while Eliza had the bigger heart and strived to be like her mother, Orpal was angrier and hungrier by the day. He would often daydream about the days when he and his twin were the only children in the house. Now, not only he had to fight each day for his parents' attention, but also for the food, clothes, and so on. Once he had a room only for himself. Then he had to share it with Tryon. It was just a matter of time before Lit would come to take away what little personal space he still had. Orpal could not understand why a family as poor as his own would keep making kids. It was winter, so there was not much work to do. Hence, there weren't many occasions to restock their food supplies, and they had to last until spring. It was the toughest time of the year for all the farmers' families, since the food was meant not only for men but also for the animals. Orpal was sick of seeing Light gobbling all the food to the point of dubbing him Leech. So, whenever it was his turn to feed the little Vernon, he would take some spoonful for himself. But Lit was not easily bullied. As soon as he noticed the spoon was not aimed to him, he would start to cry madly. And Elena would run to his side, foiling Orpal's plan. Lit never cried unless he needed to be fed or changed. And that made their parents both really happy and paranoid about him. Since he would never cry wolf, they took every wail very seriously. That day was really a bad day for Lit, starving because of his growth spurt, and was Opal's turn to take care of him. Both their parents were out. One of the cows seemed to suffer from frostbite. So Opal took the plate full of a creamy soup for the baby and gulped down a full spoonful. Lit immediately started to cry, but there was no one to hear him. "Cry all you want, Leech." Lit was now able to understand most of the common words, including Orpal's mockery. "Today is just you and I. No mom in a shining armor to come to rescue you." After saying that, he gulped down another one. Lit felt like he was going crazy. Once again, he was helpless. His so-called magic useless in time of need. What could he possibly do aside from blowing up his cover? Ventilate him? Wet him? Using fire was too dangerous. A single meal was not worthy burning down a house. Lit hunger was eating him, and his rage went above and beyond what he would have ever thought possible. "You!" he yelled inwardly, feeling so tough robbing a child. Then he saw the third spoonful, making a good half of his meal gone, moving towards Orpal's smug face. Lit anger reached a new peak, his hatred burning like a fire. "You are not my brother," he yelled inwardly. "You are nothing but a filthy thief trash." And then, more than clicking, he felt something breaking inside like a dam that could not hold the raging waters anymore. "I hope you choke on that spoon, you." Lit waved his arm against Orpal in a final struggle, and then it happened. Lit felt the mana going out to his body, reaching the spoon already in Orpal's mouth and pushing it down hard. Orpal started to choke, and after removing the spoon from his throat, he started puking. Lit was so astonished to almost forget about his rage and hunger. He had discovered something wonderful, a power that no one else in his family seemed to have. Lit has discovered spirit magic. Supreme Magus, Chapter 9. Understanding Spirit Magic. At that time, Elena and Raz were coming back to the house. Upon hearing Lid's desperate cries, they ran back to check on him. When they found Orpal on the ground puking, they understood what happened. They already had suspicion, since whenever Orpal fed Lid, he was always hungrier than usual. But now they had proof. Inside the pool of vomit, the undigested creamy soup was as clear as a day. Raz became red with anger. "You little," but had to stop. His other children had returned as well. "I am very disappointed in you, Orpal," said Elena, seeing that her hubby was too angry to speak. "From now on, Eliza will be the one feeding Lid. You can take all her shifts in the stable, since I don't think that even you could eat hay." "But Mom," Orpal said, trying to defend himself. He hated cows and their smell. "No buts, young man," Raz yelled. "And that is not punishment enough. Elena, feel free to prepare one more bowl for Lid and take the food from Orpal's share. He must learn that bad actions have consequences." They were speaking too fast for Lid, and there were too many unknown words. But Orpal had just turned pale, so it had to be good news. Orpal started crying and apologizing, but Lid made sure to cry louder, so Raz and Elena both ignored his pleas and sent him to take care of the animals. After being fed with a generous serving of soup and milk, Lid could finally focus on what had happened. After days of trial and errors experiments, he had grasped the basic of his newfound ability and gained a much deeper understanding of magic. Lid had discovered that when he casted an elemental spell, it actually consisted in a three-step process. First, he would emit the mana. Then he had to mix it with the world's energy that he was trying to manipulate. The last step was the hardest one, controlling the spell and its effects. Spirit magic skipped the second step. It used only his own power without borrowing elemental energy. That made it more difficult than any magic he had practiced so far and more mana-consuming. It also required much more focus compared to normal magic. Pure mana had no physical form, so he could not rely on his eyes for manipulating its effects. All depend on his willpower and imagination. The clearer was the mental image of the action he wanted the mana to make, the better the result. The range was also very limited, barely reaching a meter radius. Despite all its strict limitation, Lid started to practice anything but spirit magic. The ultimate discovery about it was that every improvement he did in spirit magic was also passed on all other kinds of magic. He didn't need to switch practicing between them anymore, and so he progressed in leap and bounds compared to before. From time to time, he would use a random elemental magic to check on his progress, reaching a new understanding of the profoundness of that element. The progress Lid made allowed him to improve his breathing technique. Through accumulation, he could now not only perceive how his mana core changed in size with practice, but also have a rough understanding of the amount of mana contained in his body. Using accumulation, he would feed the world's energy to his mana core. allowing it to expand from the size of a pinhead to that of a glass marble. Once the mana core grew to a marble size, further progress could only be made when the physical body forcefully compressed the mana core back to a pinhead. Lid had no idea how the phenomenon worked and had found no way around it. Mana core and body development had to go hand in hand. There was no shortcut. Bottlenecks happened when Lee tried to use accumulation when the mana core was still at its peak size. The word energy would be rejected by the mana core, going wild through his body and damaging it. By continuously undergoing expansion and compression cycles, his mana capacity was already incomparable to when he was just a newborn. After discovering and practicing spirit magic, Lid had a much finer control of his mana inside and outside his body. He managed to modify the invigoration technique so that when he breathed in the world mana, he would combine it with its own, temporarily exceeding his limits. Then he would expand the resulting energy, moving it from the solar plexus outwards until even his body hair would be overflowing with mana. Ever since he invented invigoration, he had noticed qualitative changes to his body. Lid was now better at withstanding cold and heat, and he would hardly ever get sick. When his whole family would catch a cold, he would either get over it before the symptoms manifested or recover in a few days. Unless it's all a crazy coincidence, improving invigoration is the only mean at my disposal to temper my body. If I am right, this means that I can use it as a crutch until I get big enough to do physical activity, he thought. Hopefully, it should also help me overcome my bottleneck periods faster. It's a gamble, but it shouldn't do any harm. Also, between hunger and bottlenecks, there isn't much I can do as a 7-month-old baby. As for his family life, it also experienced some changes during the following months. After the soup incident with Orpal, a divide opened between the brothers. Lid was vengeful by nature, and so was his brother. Sometimes, when Orpal was angry, would call him Leech instead of Lid, since he always called him like that in his mind. Every slip of tongue would cause him a serious scolding, and when he did it while harshly arguing with his parents, even a good spanking. Orpal blamed Lid for all his misfortunes. The little runt always giggled when he was having a hard time. The relationship between Lid and his parents instead kept getting better and better. He had already started saying babble words, making sure to say mama when Elena embraced him and dada whenever Raz came near him. In this world is even a bit similar to Earth's middle age. It's better to stay in my old man good book until I am self-sufficient. This was Lid's reasoning. He was still very afraid of father figures, and the two of them didn't have much a relationship anyway. Raz will always be busy with something, letting his wife and the eldest daughter spend the most time with the baby. To his defense, he had just wrongly assumed that Lid was too little to notice, and that they would have time to catch up later in the future, like he did with his other sons. Raz really loved him, and Lid never ceased to amaze him. He couldn't remember him crying for no reason, not even when teething. If someone bumped into his cradle or raised his voice while it was asleep, or at least pretending to, he would not make a sound, just look around before going back to sleep. Lit increasingly grew fond of Eliza. It was more like a loving aunt than a sister to him. He could see himself in her, taking care of her little brother, like he did with Carl. He would have loved to express his love, but all he could do was smile and laugh as soon as he saw her and call her Lala. She was in fact the only one besides his parents to have a Babel name. It wasn't much, but it meant the world to her. And so time went by. After 6 months from his arrival, Lit was put on the ground for the first time and started to crawl under strict supervision. At the 9th month, he started to walk and graduated himself from Babel words to real ones. On the day of his birthday, after discovering they had birthdays in that world too, he allowed himself to use simple phrases and started to make questions to complete his vocabulary. Knowing nothing about babies, it was very stressful, finding the right timing for every little thing. Quickly, Lit could always resort on cheating to find out the proper time for him to learn to do something. He was already capable of understanding most of what he could hear, so he would always be open to suggestions. If Elena was dying for him to finally say mommy instead of mama, he would wait a couple of days before making it happen. If Raz cheered for Lit running to him, he did. The real problem was paying attention to everything Raz, Eliza, and Elena said while being seemingly completely obvious about their words. Another problem was that once they let him roam free in the dining room, they gave him also a small wooden toy, expecting him to play and explore his surroundings. Lit already knew the dining room as the back of his hand, and there was not much to see in the first place. Yet he had to pretend to be curious about it. That was the hardest thing he ever done since becoming a baby, and scared him to death. He had no clue how a child would explore such bland environment, and his paranoia about blowing his cover made him sweat bullets. Seeing the expectation in their eyes, he started from the nearest thing, the fireplace. The fire was not lit. The logs were cold and covered in ashes. When he got closer, Raz stopped him. This is the fireplace. Now is safe, but fire is bad. Fire hurts. No touching it, never. Lit looked at him, seemingly confused, before trying to put his hand in the ashes. Raz grabbed his hand, blocking him. Fire is bad. No touching it. Never, his father repeated. Lit stared in his eyes like he was deeply in thought, before asking, Fire bad? Yes, very bad, Raz replied while nodding. Okay. Lit moved away from the fireplace and got close to the table. When he tried climbing up a chair, almost failing down with it, Elena ran to his rescue. Good gods, this little one sure likes danger. Seeing their increasingly worried expression, Lit believed to have found a way out of that torment. He would keep putting himself in danger, trying to climb on the table and going into the kitchen, rummaging through pots and knives. Quickly, they decided that adventure time was over. They made him sit on an old cloth spread over the wooden floor and gave him toys to play with while they recovered from their stress. He had a little wooden horse, some kind of a cart, and an old-looking dog thingy. Playing was much easier to him. Lit did not need to create stories or explaining what he was doing. He could just use playtime to practice spirit magic. Lit would actually never use his hand to move the toys, making them float as close as possible to his fingers. He really enjoyed those moments. Lit could finally openly rejoice, scream and laugh anytime he had a new discovery or a breakthrough. And all his parents would see was a happy child lost in his fantasies. Who would have ever thought that such a quiet little fellow could have such a vivid imagination? Raz said with a big proud smile on his face. Look at him. All he has is just some old toys. Yet it looks like he has the whole world in the palm of his hand. Supreme Magus, Chapter 10, Growing Pains. The following years weren't easy on Lit. He was finally allowed to do a lot of questioning, filling most of the holes in his vocabulary and starting to finally learn about his family and the new world. He learned that they were living in the village of Lutia, that was part of the county of Lustria, which in turn was part of the Griffin Kingdom. His parents knew about the neighboring countries by name, but that was it. They knew nothing about the life outside the village, nor they cared about it. In their eyes, the king was some sort of mythical beast. They put all their faith and worries in Count Lutia. Not only he administered justice and taxes in the county, he would also take part in Lutia's Spring Festival as the guest of honor. His parents never mentioned to the children anything about magic, wars, or history. They only told them the tales that could be easily dismissed as bedtime stories, even in the New World. All of their stories were filled with beautiful princesses, valiant heroes, and villainous tyrants. Lit was truly dissatisfied by such little information. He wanted to know what was the planet's name, what was the stage of the scientific development. He wanted to learn about the history of magic, the lore, the legends, anything that could give him at least a clue about what to expect from life. But it was clear they knew little more than gossip. So he could not make questions. He was not even supposed to think about it. At least his family tree was much easier to fully understand. Elena and Raz had married very early, even by village standards, barely 16. Raz, being the only child, had inherited his father's farm where they were currently living. Elena got pregnant shortly after the marriage, giving birth to the twins Eliza and Orpel. Then she got pregnant again every 2 years. That meant that Raz and Elena were currently 25 years old. Eliza and Orpel, 8 years old. Tryon, 6 years old. Tista, 4 years old. And finally, Lit, 2 years old. In fact, most of the information were leached from his siblings' questions. Lit was mostly limited to what's this? Why is that? Kind of question. Spending more and more time with the rest of the family, he also discovered why, despite his father owned such a nice farm with its own barn and hen house, had so much problems putting food on the table. Tista was born with a congenital condition that prevented her from doing any physical exertion and made her also prone to illnesses. Fast pacing was enough to leave her out of breath. She would cough from time to time, and when things were about to turn for the worse, the cough would become violent. At that point, one of her parents would have to run to the village to let Nana visit and heal her. But she could not really cure her, only alleviate the symptoms and return her to her natural state. And while a checkup wasn't expensive, the treatment was. Also, even if Ras did go pick her up and then brought Nana back home, it would still cost an extra. During a trip meant her losing business, so she required compensation. It was the constant need for the healer to put such a strain on their budget. Lit felt very sorry for her. Despite not having spent much time with Tista, she was precious for both Elena and Eliza, and that was more than enough to make her precious for him too. He felt helpless, cursing his inability to ever practice light and darkness magic. Light magic required a patient, and until he had gained a solid grasp of how it worked and what was this world's human anatomy, he would not dare put anyone's health at risk. Darkness magic was another story. Lid had only seen it once. No one in his family used it, and even in that one occasion, he had clearly felt the destructive power it held. He was also biased against it, since on Earth dark magic would always be associated with evil practices and undeads, so he had no desire to dabble with something potentially horrifying. Lit could only live on hoping to eventually get some training in magic while enduring the madness that he was getting used to call family life. He had to be lively, but not too much. He had to be curious, but not too much. He had to run around, but never get out of the door. His parents were never satisfied. If he tried to sit in a corner meditating, they would worry because he was too quiet or too lazy. If he tried to move around or help them, he would be scolded for getting in the way. They refused to teach him chore magic. That was the name of the lesser spells they used on their daily life, and prohibited him to learn. Lid could not go outside without being accompanied by someone, could not get near the fireplace, could not make too many questions. Everything was basically prohibited until he grew up. More than once, Lid wanted to scream, "I may be biologically young, but I am actually the oldest in here, damn it." But all he could do was suck it up and obey. His feud with Orpal never resolved, and he could clearly feel Tryon hostility on his brother's behalf. Clearly, Orpal was for Tryon what Eliza was for Lid, his role model. Unlike Orpal, Tryon would not completely ignore him, even when their parents were absent. But Lid could clearly see that every time his brother helped him, it was just to be polite. There was no kindness between them. Lid quickly started ignoring him in return. "I have already spent half of my whole life being worried about dysfunctional family members. Been there, done that. So, thank you, but no thank you. If you want to be a jerk, be my guest. I don't give a damn about you. These were his thoughts about the matter, so he let things fester. Once he became 3 years old, he could not take it anymore. The boredom caused by the cold winter months, where he was basically stuck at home 24 hours out of 7, aggravated by the constant hunger, was about to drive him insane. It was a stormy afternoon, and the family was gathered around the fireplace. Elena was teaching her daughters how to sew. Raz was teaching Orpal how to carve wood, while Tryon and Lit were only allowed to watch. They were still too little to handle any sharp object. Even sewing was off limits. Lit had already asked, baffling his father and flattering his mother. "You are too little and your hands are still too clumsy," she replied. And Elena was right. Lit's body felt even clumsier than his old one. Before he started practicing martial arts, just the thought of all those lost muscle memory was enough to make him cry. So he patiently waited that Raz finished instructing Orpal, and then Lit mustered all his courage and asked him to teach him how to read, write, and count. Raz was flabbergasted. "You are too young. Usually kids wait until they are 6 years old to go to school and learn. Don't you think it's boring?" That was the philosophy every man in his lineage has always upheld. Boring? What could possibly be more boring than sit here doing nothing, like yesterday and the day before, and probably tomorrow too? "Please, Daddy, try me, I beg you. Please, please, please." Raz didn't know how to say no. Lit had never asked him anything before. Even when he is clearly still hungry, if he noticed there is no more food, he never asks for more. He thought, unlike Orpal, I don't know if it's Lit that is too good, or I'm just spoiling Orpal too much. He really wanted a way out, but Elena was already staring at him. Her hands never stopped sewing, her mouth explaining the girls what they were doing wrong, but her eyes were clearly set on him. Damn it, what can I say? Learning does not even require dangerous tool. That's it, the tools. I'm such a moron sometimes. Raz looked in the Lit's puppy eyes, his heart squeezed as in a vice, but he still replied, "I'm sorry, son. We have nothing you could possibly write on, so I can't teach you." Lit had considered things through before asking, so he had already a solution at hand. He picked the biggest tray they had and filled it with the ashes collected in a bucket beside the fireplace. "Now we do. We can write as much as we want." Raz was amazed by Lit's ingenuity, and so was Elena. He was about to object again when he noticed that the stare had turned into a frown. Her hands were moving too fast, and that meant trouble for him. There was a storm outside. He could not run away from the one, and the one brewing was inside. So, with a deep sigh, he gave up. "From what do you want to start?" Raz could only hope that Lit would get bored fast and let him return to his leisure. "Count." Lit promptly replied. So Raz sat on the floor beside him and started drawing lines in the ash. Lit was ecstatic. The numbers they used had a different shape from the Arabic numerals, but aside from that, they were identical in use. Even the calculation methods were the same. So he kept the new numbers in the upper row to learn their shape and then starting doing the multiplication table. He could actually do such simple math in his head, but he needed to engrave the new numbers in both his mind and body. Once he finished, he started taking requests from his audience, and when Orpah sarcastically asked, "How much is 124 times 11?" leaving them all speechless. Elena could not help herself standing up and lifting up in a big hug. "My little genius, I'm so proud of you." In less than 1 hour, he had mastered what it would take others a full year to do. Eliza and Tista soon joined her in the embrace, congratulating the little brother, while the male side of the family was still flabbergasted. In the rural areas, they learned how to count, only not to get ripped off when they sold or bought merchandise. So they remembered only addition and subtraction, letting the useless multiplication and division fade away in their minds. Reading and writing required more time, but it was equally simple. Lit already knew most of the words and how to spell them. He only needed to learn the alphabet and memorize it to be able to read and write. Once again, his family was stunned, and the only one not rejoicing with them was Orpal, left alone with his envy and scorn.